The morning mist clung to the mountains like ancient memories refusing to fade. Sarah Chun adjusted her hiking pack and checked her water bottles one more time. At 19, she had inherited more than just her grandmother's stubborn streak and love for impossible quests. She had inherited a promise. 3 months ago, her grandmother May had passed away peacefully in her sleep, clutching an old photograph and whispering about dragons and debts that needed paying. The family had dismissed it as the rambling of an old woman whose mind had begun to wander. But Sarah knew better. Grandmother May had always been sharp as a tack, even at 93. Her stories weren't fantasies, they were memories. The photograph showed a massive creature with scales that seemed to shimmer between silver and gold, its eyes clouded with milky cataracts. Standing beside, it was a much younger version of May, barely 20 herself, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged in a war zone. On the back, May had written in her careful handwriting, Kai Vash the Ancient. Promise kept, promise owed. The water from home. Sarah had spent weeks researching, following obscure leads through old military records and classified documents that her security clearance from her job at the Geological Survey had barely allowed her to access. What she found changed everything she thought she knew about her grandmother's service during World War II. Mei Chun hadn't been a simple army nurse, as the family had always believed. She had been part of something called the Xenological Contact Division, a secret program that dealt with what the files euphemistically called non-human entities. The program had been buried so deep that even most of the military brass hadn't known about it. Dragons, it turned out, were real. They had been humanity's secret allies during the war, fighting alongside human forces against threats that conventional weapons couldn't handle. But the alliance had come at a cost. The dragons had been dying, not from battle, but from a creeping blindness that affected their kind. Their sight, once sharp enough to spot enemy aircraft from 50 miles away, gradually failed as they aged. The condition was irreversible, until May had made a discovery that changed everything. Water from Earth. Not just any water, but water from specific sources that contained unique mineral compositions found nowhere else in the galaxy. May had developed a treatment using spring water from the mountains of Northern California, combined with certain rare Earth elements that only existed in specific geological formations. It had worked. The dragon she had treated, Kai Vash, had recovered most of his sight and lived for decades longer than his kind typically survived. But there had only been enough water for one treatment. May had promised to return with more, to help other dragons who suffered from the same condition. The war had ended, the program had been shut down, and contact with the dragon communities had been severed. May had tried for years to reconnect, to fulfill her promise, but the channels had been permanently closed. Now Sarah stood at the trailhead leading to the same mountain spring her grandmother had discovered 75 years ago. The geological surveys confirmed it. The water here contained an impossible combination of minerals that shouldn't exist together in nature. Something about this place was special, and Sarah was betting her grandmother's reputation on it. The hike took 6 hours through terrain that grew increasingly treacherous. Sarah's GPS started acting strangely as she climbed higher, the readings fluctuating wildly before finally losing signal altogether. She switched to her grandmother's old compass, and the hand-drawn maps May had somehow preserved all these years. The spring, when she finally found it, wasn't what she had expected. It bubbled up from a rocky outcrop that seemed to pulse with an inner light. The water itself was crystal clear, but had an almost oily quality to it, as if it contained layers of different densities. Sarah carefully filled the specialized container she had brought, following the exact procedures May had outlined in her journals. As she worked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The forest around the spring was unnaturally quiet, as if every living thing was holding its breath. When she finished collecting the water, she sat back on her heels and spoke to the empty air. I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm Mei Chin's granddaughter. She never forgot her promise. She spent her whole life trying to find a way back to you. This water, it's supposed to help dragons who can't see. I have enough for maybe a dozen treatments, and I've figured out how to synthesize more if this works. The silence stretched on for long minutes. Then, from somewhere high above, came a sound like wind through massive wings. Sarah looked up, but saw only empty sky. Still, something had changed. The air itself felt different, charged with possibility. She packed her samples carefully and began the long journey back down the mountain. What she didn't see was the shimmer of scales against rock high above, or the great head that turned to follow her progress until she disappeared into the treeline. 3 days later, Sarah was in her laboratory running analysis on the water samples when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something compelled her to answer. Sarah Chun. The voice was deep, resonant, with an accent she couldn't place. Yes, who is this? My name is Marcus Webb, but that's not important. What matters is that certain parties are very interested in your recent mountain expedition. We need to meet. I don't know what you're talking about. Spring water with 17 different rare earth minerals in impossible concentrations. Treatment protocols for a degenerative ocular condition that affects species with crystalline eye structures. Ring any bells? Sarah's blood went cold. How do you know about that? Because, Ms. Chun, you've just fulfilled a promise that's been outstanding for 75 years. And someone very important has been waiting a very long time to thank your family properly. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone. Outside her laboratory window, she could have sworn she saw something large and winged pass overhead, but when she looked up, there was nothing there. That night, her grandmother's journal fell open to a page Sarah had never seen before. In May's handwriting, it read, "If the water works, if the dragons return, humanity will never be the same. What we lost in the war was more than just knowledge. It was our first true alliance with another intelligent species." Sarah, if you're reading this, then the wait is finally over. At the bottom of the page was a series of coordinates and a single word, contact. Sarah spent the rest of the night staring at those coordinates, knowing that tomorrow would change everything. She thought about her grandmother's stories, about dragons fighting alongside human pilots in skies torn apart by war. She thought about promises kept across decades, and water that could restore sight to beings humanity had forgotten how to see. Outside her window, the stars seemed brighter than usual, and if she listened carefully, she could almost hear the sound of wings in the distance, growing closer with each passing hour. The phone rang again just before dawn. This time, Sarah answered on the first ring. "It's time," said the same deep voice from before. Kai Vash is waiting. The abandoned airfield stretched out under the pre-dawn darkness like a ghost from another era. Sarah's rental car crunched over weeds growing through cracked asphalt as she followed the coordinates her grandmother had hidden away for decades. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she parked near what looked like an old hangar, its metal sides streaked with rust and age. Marcus Webb emerged from the shadows like he had been waiting there for hours. He was older than his voice had suggested, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. But it was what stood behind him that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Kai Vash the Ancient was magnificent and heartbreaking all at once. The dragon towered 30 feet high even with his great head lowered, scales that might once have shimmered like molten metal, now dulled with age. His massive wings were folded against his sides, and his blind eyes, clouded white as pearls, turned toward Sarah with an awareness that defied his condition. May's granddaughter. The dragon spoke, his voice a rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. "I can smell her blood in you. And something more. Hope, perhaps." Sarah found her voice somewhere in her amazement. "I brought the water, just like she promised." 75 years, Kai Vash said softly. "I've been blind for 40 of those years, watching my people fade one by one as the sight death claims us. We are a proud species, child of May. To lose our vision is to lose everything that makes us what we are." Marcus stepped forward, his expression grave. "Before we proceed, you need to understand what you're walking into. The Xenological Contact Division wasn't shut down because the war ended. It It was shut down because certain elements in the government decided that humanity wasn't ready for the truth about our place in the galactic community. What truth? Sarah asked, though part of her was afraid to know. That we're not alone, and we never have been. Dragons aren't from Earth, Sarah. They're refugees. Their homeworld was destroyed 300 years ago by something we only refer to as the Devourers. The dragons who fought alongside us in World War II were the last survivors of their species, and they were here because Earth was the only world they'd found that could sustain their biology. Kaivash shifted slightly, and Sarah could see the weight of ages in his movements. My people came here dying. The sight death had already begun to claim us, and we thought it was simply our time to fade into extinction. Then, May discovered that this world's unique mineral composition could halt the progression of our condition. More than halt it, reverse it in some cases. But treating me used up their entire supply, the dragon continued. Your grandmother spent her remaining years trying to find more, try to re-establish contact with my people. She knew that without the treatment, we would all eventually succumb to blindness. Sarah pulled the specially designed containers from her pack, each one filled with the precious spring water her grandmother had discovered. I've analyzed the mineral composition. I think I can synthesize more if this works. How many of your people are left? The silence that followed was answer enough. Show me, Marcus said quietly. Kaivash lowered his great head until it was level with Sarah's. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't simply clouded. There were structures within them that looked almost crystalline, grown over with what appeared to be mineral deposits. It was as if his eyes were slowly turning to stone. The treatment process is complex, Sarah said, falling back on her scientific training to steady her nerves. I need to create a solution that's exactly the right pH and mineral concentration. Too much, and it could cause permanent damage. Too little, and it won't work at all. She spent the next hour setting up her equipment, mixing precise amounts of the spring water with solutions she had prepared in her lab. Kaivash waited with infinite patience, occasionally answering her technical questions about dragon physiology with the detached precision of someone who had spent decades studying his own condition. My grandmother never told me how she figured out the treatment, Sarah said, as she prepared the final solution. How did she know what would work? May was remarkable, Kaivash replied. She saw patterns where others saw only chaos. When she first encountered me, I was nearly dead from injuries sustained in battle. The sight death was already advanced, but she noticed that my eyes would clear slightly when exposed to certain electromagnetic frequencies. She theorized that the crystalline structures in our visual organs were responding to specific mineral resonances. She spent weeks testing different combinations of Earth's natural resources. The water from that spring was the 13th different source she tried. I had given up hope by then, but May never did. She said humans had a gift for finding solutions where none seemed to exist. Sarah smiled despite her nervousness. That sounds like her. The treatment itself was surprisingly simple. Sarah used a specialized dropper to place 3 drops of the prepared solution directly onto each of Kaivash's eyes. The effect was immediate. The clouded structures began to dissolve, clearing away like fog before sunlight. Within minutes, pupils that had been hidden behind cataracts for decades became visible once again. Kaivash blinked several times, then raised his head to look directly at Sarah. His eyes, now clear, were the color of deep emeralds with flecks of gold that seemed to shift and dance in the dim light of the hangar. I can see, he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. After 40 years of darkness, I can see. But his expression quickly shifted from joy to concern as he looked past Sarah toward the horizon. And what I see troubles me greatly. What is it? Marcus asked, tension creeping into his voice. Ships, Kaivash said, his voice growing urgent. 13,000 vessels, approaching from the outer system. I can see their energy signatures even from here. They're not human. Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. Are they your people? Some of them, yes. But not all. The formations I'm seeing. Marcus, we need to contact your government immediately. Something is very wrong. Marcus was already reaching for his phone when Kai Vash spoke again, his voice carrying a note of ancient dread. The Devourers have found us, and they've brought the last survivors of my people as prisoners. In the distance, Sarah could see the first glimmers of light in the eastern sky. Dawn was coming, and with it, apparently, the most important day in human history. She thought of her grandmother's journal, of promises kept and debts honored, of water that could restore sight and hope to dying species. But as she looked up at the slowly brightening sky, Sarah couldn't help but wonder if giving Kai Vash back his sight had come just in time for him to witness the end of everything they were trying to save. The dragon's newly clear eyes tracked movement across the sky that no human could yet see, and his expression grew grim with knowledge that Sarah was only beginning to understand. The real war, it seemed, was just beginning. "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, his phone already connecting to numbers that didn't officially exist. Kai Vash was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced vision calculating distances and trajectories across the vast emptiness between worlds. 3 days, he said finally. Maybe 4 if they maintain current approach vectors. But, Marcus, you need to understand, this isn't just about my people anymore. Earth has been noticed, and once the Devourers know a world can sustain life, they don't stop until every living thing on it is dead. The Situation Room, buried 3 levels beneath the Pentagon, buzzed with activity that bordered on controlled chaos. Sarah sat at a conference table surrounded by generals, scientists, and officials whose security clearances were so high their names weren't even printed on their badges. On the wall-mounted screens, satellite feeds showed 13,000 points of light approaching Earth's outer solar system in formations that no human military tactician had ever seen. "Let me get this straight," General Harrison said, his weathered face grim as he studied the data streaming across multiple monitors. "We have alien warships approaching Earth, some containing friendly forces being held prisoner by hostile entities that destroyed an entire civilization. And our only tactical advisor is a dragon that's been blind for 40 years until yesterday." "That's an oversimplification, but essentially correct," Marcus replied from his position near the main display. The past 72 hours had aged him visibly, and Sarah suspected he hadn't slept since Kai Vash had first spotted the approaching fleet. Kai Vash himself was too large to fit in the underground facility, so they had rigged up a communication system that allowed him to observe everything through high-definition cameras while remaining at the nearby airfield. His voice came through speakers with crystalline clarity. "General Harrison, I understand your skepticism." The dragon's voice filled the room. "But I have fought the Devourers before. They are unlike anything your military has ever encountered. They don't simply conquer worlds. They consume them entirely, breaking down all organic matter into raw energy that feeds their collective consciousness." Sarah had spent the past 2 days working around the clock to synthesize more of the treatment solution. She now had enough to restore sight to approximately 50 dragons, but according to Kai Vash, there were nearly 300 of his people scattered among the approaching ships, most being held in stasis pods as the Devourers' prisoners. "What about their technology?" asked Dr. Elizabeth Santos, head of the military's Advanced Weapons Research Division. "Do we have any chance of matching their capabilities?" "The Devourer ships are living entities," Kai Vash explained. "They grow rather than being built, and they can adapt to different types of damage in real time. Conventional weapons will have limited effectiveness. However, they do have weaknesses." The dragon paused, and Sarah could picture him staring at the approaching fleet with his newly restored vision, analyzing patterns and formations that human observers were only beginning to detect. They're vulnerable to certain electromagnetic frequencies, the same frequencies that affect the crystalline structures in dragon eyes. If we can generate those frequencies at sufficient amplitude, we can disrupt their neural networks temporarily. "How temporarily?" General Harrison asked. "Long enough to evacuate the prisoner ships and mount a coordinated counterattack, if we're fortunate. The difficulty is that the frequency generators would need to be positioned throughout the solar system to be effective, and the power requirements are enormous." Sarah found herself speaking before she had fully formed the thought. What if we don't try to fight them directly? What if we give them what they want? The room fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment. All eyes turned to her, and she felt her cheeks flush with heat. Explain, Marcus said quietly. They're here because they detected dragon survivors on Earth, right? And they're keeping those dragons alive because they need them for something. What if we can convince them that the dragons here have already served their purpose and are no longer valuable? Kai Vash's voice carried a note of intrigue. Continue this line of reasoning, young Chun. Sarah stood up, moving to the display screen showing the fleet's approach trajectory. According to everything we've learned, the Devourers wiped out the dragon homeworld but kept survivors as prisoners. That means they need dragons alive for something specific. But what if that something was already accomplished? You're suggesting we fake the dragons' deaths? Dr. Santos asked. Not fake them. Make the dragons genuinely undetectable to Devourer sensors. The same mineral compounds that restore dragon sight also affect their biological signatures, right? What if we could use larger concentrations to mask their presence entirely? Kai Vash was quiet for several long moments. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone in the room lean forward. There is precedent for this approach. During the final battle for my homeworld, several hundred dragons attempted to hide in deep caverns filled with similar mineral deposits. The Devourers never found them, but we assumed they had died in the planetary destruction. If they could be shielded by natural formations, then perhaps artificial shielding might work as well. General Harrison looked skeptical. Even if we could hide your people, what about Earth? These Devourers still know this planet exists. They're still coming here. That's where the real plan comes in, Sarah said, her excitement building as the pieces fell into place. We don't just hide the dragons. We make Earth look like a dead world. The approaching fleet includes dragon prisoners, right? What if those dragons accidentally transmitted a message saying that Earth's dragon population had succumbed to the sight death disease and that the planet itself was now contaminated with the mineral compounds that caused the condition? The room erupted in discussion as military strategists and scientists began examining the proposal from every angle. Sarah found herself fielding questions about mineral distribution, atmospheric contamination, and biological warfare simulation that pushed her knowledge to its limits. It's brilliant in its simplicity, Dr. Santos said after 20 minutes of intense analysis. But the execution would be incredibly complex. We need to alter atmospheric composition across the entire planet, create false biological signatures, and somehow coordinate with prisoner dragons we can't even communicate with. Actually, we can communicate with them, Kai Vash interjected. Dragons possess a form of quantum entanglement consciousness that operates across vast distances. If I can make contact with the prisoners, I can coordinate their part of the deception. Marcus was studying data feeds from deep space monitoring stations. We have approximately 48 hours before the fleet reaches Earth's orbital space. Can we pull this off in that time frame? We have to, Sarah said simply. Because the alternative is watching every living thing on Earth get consumed by creatures that see us as nothing more than fuel for their expansion. The next 36 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Sarah worked with teams of chemists and engineers to develop atmospheric dispersal systems for the mineral compounds. Military units around the world began setting up electromagnetic generators based on specifications Kai Vash provided. Most challenging of all, dragon survivors from around the globe began emerging from hiding places they had maintained for decades, responding to calls from Kai Vash that no human could hear. Sarah met 3 more dragons during this period, all of them suffering from advanced stages of sight death. Each treatment with her synthesized solution was a small miracle, watching ancient beings regain the ability to see their world clearly for the first time in years. But there was no time to celebrate these victories. Every restored dragon immediately joined the desperate effort to save both their species and their adopted world. As the deadline approached, Sarah found herself back at the original airfield, standing beside Kaivash as he stared up at a sky that was beginning to show the first visible signs of the approaching fleet. His enhanced vision could see details that would remain invisible to human eyes for hours yet. "Are we ready?" she asked. "As ready as we can be," the dragon replied. "In 12 hours, we'll discover whether human ingenuity and dragon knowledge can overcome a force that has consumed 1,000 worlds. Your grandmother will be proud, Sarah. She always believed that the partnership between our species could accomplish impossible things." High above, the first enemy ships became visible as moving stars against the darkness. The real test was about to begin, and Sarah couldn't help but think that everything, her grandmother's legacy, the survival of 2 species, and the future of Earth itself, now depended on water from a mountain spring, and the desperate hope that sometimes the best way to win a war was to convince the enemy there was nothing left worth fighting for. The fate of 2 worlds hung in the balance, and in just a few hours, they would discover if 75 years of patience and planning had been enough to save everything they held dear. The moment of truth arrived with the silence of space itself. Sarah stood in the renovated command center that had been hastily constructed at the airfield, surrounded by screens showing data streams from around the globe. Through the reinforced windows, she could see Kaivash and 7 other dragons positioned in a protective circle, their newly restored eyes fixed on the sky, where the enemy fleet was now clearly visible to the naked eye. "Atmospheric contamination at 92% coverage," reported Dr. Santos through the communications link from the Pentagon. "Mineral dispersal is complete across all major population centers." The plan was audacious in its complexity. For the past 36 hours, aircraft and ground-based systems have been releasing specially formulated compounds into Earth's atmosphere, a cocktail of the same minerals that restored Dragon's sight, but in concentrations that would appear lethal to Devourer's sensors. To any external observer, Earth now looked like a planet dying from mineral poisoning. "Dragon positioning confirmed worldwide," Marcus announced from his station. "All 73 confirmed survivors are in position within shielded caves and underground facilities." Sarah watched the readouts, showing electromagnetic field strength across the globe. Hidden generators pulsed with the specific frequencies that disrupted Devourer neural networks, creating interference patterns that would mask the dragon's life signs, while making Earth appear uninhabitable to the approaching force. "Contact established with prisoner dragons," Kaivash announced, his voice carrying the strain of maintaining quantum-entangled communication across interplanetary distances. "They understand the plan. When the Devourers scan for life signs, the prisoners will transmit false memories suggesting that Earth's dragon population died out months ago from sight death complications." The lead ships of the enemy fleet were now close enough for detailed observation. Through powerful telescopes, Sarah could see vessels that defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design. They pulsed with organic movement, their whole surfaces shifting and flowing like living tissue. Some were massive, easily the size of Earth's largest cities, while others darted between the larger ships like schools of metallic fish. "Energy signatures are off the charts," reported the sensor technician. "Whatever powers those things, it's unlike anything we've ever seen. They feed on consumed worlds," Kaivash explained. "Each ship carries the life energy of dozens of planets. That's what makes them so dangerous, and why they must never be allowed to feed on Earth." The waiting was the hardest part. For 3 hours, the fleet approached at what seemed like an agonizingly slow pace, growing larger and more menacing with each passing minute. Sarah found herself checking and rechecking her equipment, verifying that the mineral concentrations remained stable and that the electromagnetic shields were functioning properly. Then, without warning, everything changed. "Detection sweep incoming," announced the communications officer. "They're scanning the entire planet." Sarah felt her heart stop as energy beams invisible to human eyes, but clearly perceived by the dragons, swept across Earth's surface. For 60 seconds that felt like hours, alien sensors probed every inch of the planet, cataloging atmospheric composition, electromagnetic signatures, and biological indicators. Kai Vash, are you still in contact with the prisoners? Marcus asked, tension thick in his voice. Yes, they are transmitting the false memories now. According to their reports to the Devourer collective consciousness, Earth's dragon population succumbed to mineral poisoning 3 months ago. The planet is now considered contaminated and unsuitable for consumption. The scanning beams swept across Earth twice more, then suddenly cut off. The fleet's movement pattern changed. Ships that had been moving in attack formation now adopting what appeared to be a more cautious approach. We're receiving a transmission, the communications officer announced, surprise evident in her voice. It's not directed at us. It appears to be internal Devourer communications that we're intercepting through the dragon prisoners. Kai Vash listened to something only he could hear, then translated for the human observers. The fleet commander is reporting to the collective consciousness. They confirm the detection of mineral contamination consistent with mass dragon deaths. They are disappointed that Earth no longer offers harvestable resources. Sarah held her breath as the massive ships hung in space above Earth, clearly debating their next course of action. Everything depended on convincing beings that had destroyed countless worlds that this particular planet was no longer worth their attention. Wait, Kai Vash said suddenly, his voice sharp with alarm. There's something else. The Devourers are not just disappointed about losing Earth as a harvest target. They're concerned about the mineral contamination spreading to other worlds. They're considering sterilizing the planet to prevent contamination of nearby systems. The command center erupted in urgent discussion as military leaders realized their deception might have worked too well. Sarah stared at the screens showing the alien fleet, watching as several of the largest ships began to glow with an ominous energy that could only mean one thing. They're powering weapons, Dr. Santos reported grimly. Energy readings suggest they're preparing to glass the entire planet. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, searching for a solution that didn't exist in any textbook or training manual. Then, she remembered something her grandmother had written in her journals about the original contact with dragons during World War II. Kai Vash, can the prisoners hear everything the Devourers are planning? Yes, but I don't see how that helps. We cannot fight this many ships with the resources available. We don't need to fight them, Sarah said, moving to the communication console. We need to give them a reason to want to preserve Earth rather than destroy it. She began typing rapidly, pulling up atmospheric analysis data and mineral composition readings from around the globe. Can you have the prisoners transmit new information to the Devourer consciousness? Tell them that Earth's contamination isn't random. It's the result of a specific geological process that creates the mineral compounds they're detecting. I'm not following your reasoning, Marcus said. Sarah's fingers flew over the keyboard as she pulled up geological surveys and mineral distribution maps. The Devourers destroyed the dragon homeworld, but they kept dragons alive because they needed them for something. What if that something was finding worlds with these specific mineral formations? What if Earth isn't just contaminated? What if Earth is the source? Understanding dawned on Kai Vash's features. You want them to believe that Earth is the only world capable of producing the minerals that affect dragon biology. That destroying Earth would eliminate their ability to control dragon populations on other worlds. Exactly. Make them think that Earth is too valuable to destroy because it's the only place in the galaxy where these compounds occur naturally. The dragon was quiet for several moments as he communicated with the prisoners aboard the Devourer ships. Sarah watched the weapons readings on the alien vessels, hoping against hope that the charging sequence would stop before it reached the point of no return. It's working, Kai Vash announced. The weapons are powering down. The fleet commander is reassessing the situation based on new geological data the prisoners are transmitting. For another tense hour, the alien fleet hung motionless in Earth's orbital space while their collective consciousness debated the planet's fate. Sarah found herself thinking about her grandmother's legacy, about promises kept across decades, and the unlikely alliance between two species that had saved both their worlds. Finally, the ships began to move again, but not toward Earth. They were pulling back, adopting positions at the edge of the solar system that suggested long-term observation rather than immediate attack. Status report from the prisoners, Kai Vash announced. The Devourer Collective has decided to establish a monitoring station at the outer system edge. They will observe Earth from a distance to study the mineral formations they believe are unique in the galaxy. The planet is to remain untouched to preserve what they now consider an invaluable natural resource. The command center erupted in cheers, but Sarah felt only exhaustion. They had bought Earth time, possibly years or decades, but the threat hadn't been eliminated. The Devourers were still out there, still watching, still waiting. "What about your people?" she asked Kai Vash. "The ones being held prisoner?" The dragon's expression grew sad. "They will remain prisoners for now, but they are alive, and as long as the Devourers believe Earth is necessary for controlling dragon populations, they will not risk losing that advantage by harming the survivors." As night fell over the airfield, Sarah stood beside the ancient dragon and looked up at stars that now held both promise and peril. They had saved Earth through deception and ingenuity, but the real work was just beginning. Somewhere out there, 300 dragons waited for rescue, and 13,000 enemy ships watched Earth with the patience of predators, convinced their prey wasn't going anywhere. The water from her grandmother's mountain spring had restored more than just dragon sight. It had restored hope to two species facing extinction. But Sarah knew that hope alone wouldn't be enough to win the larger war that was coming. They needed something more, something that her grandmother's generation had begun but never finished. They needed a true alliance between humans and dragons that could stand against the darkness between the stars. And looking at Kai Vash beside her, his clear eyes reflecting starlight that held both beauty and danger, Sarah knew that the Real adventure was just beginning. 6 months after the Devourer fleet had taken position at the edge of Earth's solar system, Sarah Chin stood in what had once been an abandoned military research facility and was now the heart of the most ambitious project in human history. The Dragon Alliance Integration Center hummed with activity as humans and dragons worked side by side, their combined knowledge creating technologies that neither species could have developed alone. The facility itself had been transformed beyond recognition. Massive chambers accommodated dragons of various sizes, while smaller workshops allowed for the precise work that human hands could accomplish. The walls were lined with screens showing data streams from across the solar system, monitoring stations that watched the Devourer ships with the same intensity that those ships watched Earth. Structural integrity is holding at 97%, announced Dr. James Park, the human engineer who had become the project's chief designer. The biometal composite is responding to stress tests better than our most optimistic projections. Sarah observed the test from a viewing platform alongside Kai Vash and 3 other dragons whose sight she had restored over the past months. Before them, a prototype spacecraft unlike anything previously imagined went through flight maneuvers that would have been impossible with conventional human technology. The ship itself was a marvel of interspecies cooperation. Its hull was grown rather than built, using techniques the dragons had developed over millennia, but powered by human fusion technology. Its weapons systems combined dragon bioengineering with human electromagnetic theory. Most importantly, its navigation and sensing systems used the quantum-entangled consciousness that allowed dragons to communicate across vast distances. The neural interface is stable, reported Dr. Martinez from the medical monitoring station. Captain Reynolds' brain activity shows perfect synchronization with the dragon pilot consciousness. Inside the test ship, Captain Lisa Reynolds, a former Air Force pilot selected for her ability to remain calm under extreme stress, was linked through a bioneural interface to Zephyr, a young dragon whose sight Sarah had restored just weeks earlier. Together, they piloted the hybrid craft with a precision that neither human reflexes nor dragon instincts could achieve alone. Coming around for final approach, Reynolds reported, her voice steady despite the fact that she was experiencing flight from a dragon's perspective while the dragon experienced human tactical thinking. All systems showing green. This is actually starting to feel natural. The past 6 months have been a whirlwind of discovery and development. Once the immediate threat of planetary destruction had passed, both species had thrown themselves into preparing for the larger conflict they knew was coming. The Devour monitoring station wasn't just watching Earth. It was studying their defenses, learning their capabilities, and undoubtedly planning for the day when they would no longer consider the planet too valuable to destroy. Sarah's role had evolved far beyond simply treating dragon blindness. The mineral compounds she had discovered didn't just restore sight. They enhanced the quantum-entangled consciousness that allowed dragons to communicate instantly across any distance. By combining those compounds with human neurological technology, they had created a communication network that the Devourers couldn't detect or intercept. Incoming transmission from Deep Space Monitor 7, announced the communications officer. The Devourer fleet is showing new movement patterns. Sarah felt her stomach clench as she moved to the main tactical display. Over the months, they had identified several distinct patterns in the alien ship's movements. Most were routine patrol patterns, resource gathering, maintenance cycles. But there were others that indicated preparation for some kind of major operation. Analysis suggests they're forming up into attack groups, reported Commander Sarah Walsh, the military liaison who had become the project's strategic coordinator. Intelligence estimates they're preparing to test our defenses within the next few weeks. Kaivash studied the display with his enhanced vision, able to detect details in the sensor data that human observers might miss. The formations are consistent with what we observed before the destruction of our homeworld. They are preparing for a harvesting operation. But they think Earth is too valuable to destroy, Dr. Park protested. Why would they risk it now? Because they've realized something we hoped they wouldn't, Sarah said quietly, understanding dawning with cold certainty. They've figured out that we're not actually contaminated. They've been watching us for 6 months, and our biosignatures are too healthy for a planet dying from mineral poisoning. The command center fell silent except for the hum of electronics and the subtle sounds of dragon breathing. Everyone present understood what this meant. Their deception had bought them time, but that time was now running out. How long do we have? Commander Walsh asked. Based on fleet positioning and energy readings, probably 2 weeks, Kaivash replied. But this time they won't hesitate to destroy everything if we resist. They've had months to analyze our defenses and plan countermeasures. Sarah looked around the command center at the faces of humans and dragons who had worked tirelessly to prepare for this moment. 12 prototype hybrid ships sat in the facility's launch bays, each one crewed by a human dragon pilot team. It wasn't much against 13,000 enemy vessels, but it was more than anyone had thought possible 6 months ago. What's the status of Project Phoenix? She asked. Commander Walsh brought up a new set of displays showing construction progress at hidden facilities around the globe. 73% complete. We'll have maybe 8 operational units by the time they arrive. Project Phoenix was their desperate gambit. Massive orbital platforms that combined human industrial capacity with dragon biotechnology to create defense stations that could grow and adapt in real time. Each platform was designed to support hundreds of hybrid fighters while providing long-range firepower that could threaten even the largest Devourer ships. What about the prisoner rescue operation? Sarah asked. That's the real question, Kaivash admitted. We have 12 ships capable of reaching the Devourer fleet, and we've identified the prison vessels holding our people. But extracting 300 prisoners while fighting 13,000 enemy ships, the mathematics are not encouraging. Sarah walked to the observation window and stared out at the night sky. Somewhere up there, beyond the reach of human sight, dragon survivors waited in alien prisons while their captors prepared to consume another world. The water from her grandmother's mountain spring had started a chain of events that led to this moment. 2 species working together, preparing to fight for their mutual survival against odds that any reasonable analysis would call impossible. There's something we haven't considered, she said suddenly. The Devourers have been watching us for 6 months. They've seen how humans and dragons work together. They've observed our technology, our tactics, our capabilities. That's what we're worried about. Dr. Park said. No, you're missing the point. They've been watching, but they haven't been learning. They're a collective consciousness. They think in terms of consumption and absorption. They've never encountered two species that choose to cooperate rather than compete. Understanding dawned on Kaivash's features. You're suggesting that our very alliance is something they cannot properly assess because they have no experience with voluntary cooperation between intelligent species. Exactly. They've spent 300 years consuming worlds where different species fight each other for resources. They've never seen what happens when two species combine their strengths instead of competing for survival. Commander Walsh was already pulling up tactical projections. If you're right, then they might be underestimating our capabilities because they're calculating based on either human or dragon technology independently, not on what we can achieve together. The next 2 weeks passed in a frenzy of final preparations. Every hybrid ship underwent final systems checks and live-fire exercises. The Phoenix platforms moved into position around Earth's major population centers, their biometal hulls gleaming with weapons that grew like flowers opening to sunlight. Most importantly, Sarah worked with communication teams to establish quantum-entangled links with every Dragon prisoner aboard the Devourer fleet. When the enemy ships finally began their approach, Earth was as ready as it could be. Sarah stood once again in the command center, watching displays that showed human and Dragon forces preparing for the most important battle in the history of either species. All stations report ready, Commander Walsh announced. Hybrid squadrons are launching now. Through the facility's windows, Sarah watched 12 ships rise into the night sky, each one carrying the hopes of two worlds. The ships moved with a grace that purely human or purely dragon craft could never achieve, their biometal hulls shifting and adapting as they climbed toward the stars. Dragon prisoners are standing by, Kaivash reported. When a moment comes, they'll act. Sarah thought about her grandmother, about promises kept across decades, about water from mountain springs that could restore sight and hope to dying species. Mei Chun had begun this alliance in the darkness of a world war, never knowing that her actions would one day save two civilizations from extinction. Contact in 30 seconds, the tactical officer announced. As the first shots lit up the space around Earth, Sarah realized that this battle would determine more than just the survival of humans and dragons. It would prove whether cooperation was stronger than consumption, whether alliance could triumph over absorption, whether two species working together could accomplish what neither could achieve alone. The real test of the Dragon Alliance was about to begin, and the fate of countless worlds hung in the balance. But as Sarah watched human and dragon forces moving in perfect coordination against an enemy that had never faced such unity, she felt something her grandmother would have recognized. The unshakable belief that sometimes, against all odds, the good guys really could win. The stars themselves seemed to hold their breath as the battle for Earth's future began in earnest, and water that had once restored a dragon's sight now flowed through the veins of an alliance that might just save the galaxy.